I'm a preacher's kid. I grew up with my mom, dad, and older brother. Most of my life I lived in a parsonage. A parsonage is a house provided by the church to the preacher and his family. Contrary to popular belief, ministers make very little. Unless you're Joel Osteen or preach at a megachurch, preachers make just above the poverty line. That's why I knew it was a calling for my dad. I definitely knew he wasn't in it for the money. But I'm not here to push my religious beliefs or win you over to the virtues of my family. I'm here to tell you about the haunting. I'll be touching on religious topics, but only where the story demands it for context. My family moved into the parsonage in the late 90s when I was 10. I fully believe that there were dark things already waiting for me there. I'm in my 30s now, and I still look back on those times with absolute terror. This was before Zach Baggins told us about EVPs and residual hauntings, before the Paranormal Activity franchise made my story cliché, and before YouTubers had list videos about the type of hauntings, and before I knew that the first signs of a demonic haunting is the appearance of shadow people. Like I said, I'm an adult now. I've done my research. I've tried to debunk everything. Part of me sincerely hopes it isn't real. I wish a doctor would have diagnosed me with a mental disorder that caused hallucinations. I wish I would have found out my room was getting too much carbon monoxide. I wish there was an actual human intruder secretly living in the attic. Because the alternative is too much. It's too dark. I had to grow fast, or I would have been consumed by the abyss of nihilism. I was only 10 years old, dealing with ageless, hateful entities. I believe this creature was already there at the parsonage when we moved in. Maybe somebody knew it was for preachers and they put a curse on it. Now, it was just laying dormant, waiting for something to call it, to channel it. So now we need to talk about the movie Event Horizon. I'm not saying the sci-fi movie directed by Paul W.S. Anderson is an evil movie. I just think the darkness at my house used the movie. Like how spirits use a seance or Ouija board to grow stronger. It used my fear of the movie to manifest itself. My parents knew the negative consequences of keeping their kids sheltered for too long. My parents knew being too strict would have had the opposite effect on us when we left the house. They didn't want to let us become adults being naive and with no self-control. We would bolt towards bad decisions like a dog finally let off his leash. So I grew up on Terminator 2, edited for TV Jason movies, and all the Die Hards, also edited for TV. I loved the Aliens and Predator movies, and Doom 64 was my favorite game on my Nintendo. So you can see why me and my brother wanted to rent Event Horizon after seeing the previews, which makes you think aliens are the bad guys. Well, spoilers for a 20-year-old movie, it's not aliens, it's hell. Like the literal hell from the Bible. Think of the horrors of the warp from Warhammer 40k. I won't spoil it any further for those wanting to see the film, but there's one scene in particular that effed me up. If you've seen the film, you know the scene I'm talking about. The scene shows people being tortured in hell. I actually love the movie now and own the Blu-ray, but that scene scared the shit out of 10-year-old me. I shrugged it off pretty cool-like in front of my older brother until the nighttime came. Once again, I started thinking about that movie. That scene. My young mind started questioning everything with Sunday school logic. Do people really go to hell? Is that what it's like? What if we all go to hell? What if I do? How do I even comprehend eternity? What if there is no heaven? Only the darkness afterward? Only hell? I was having an existential crisis before I hit puberty. This wasn't like all the other spooky movies I had been scared by. This was crushing. And then the physical things started happening. My eyes wouldn't adjust to the lack of light in my room. There was pitch black darkness all around me. I started to shiver in my bed because it was cold all of a sudden. I felt cold tendrils sneaking up my leg, chest, and finally shoulders. Me and my brother shared the same room, but I was too scared to call out for him. It felt like the darkness was right in front of my face. I felt like something in the darkness would lash out and bite me, like a snarling wolf hovering over its prey. Somehow, in my shivering, terrified state, I fell asleep. The dream I had was vivid and grim. In my dream, I was standing naked in a forest. A great tree stood in front of me. It stretched high into the sky like a building. I could see dots of color up in its green tree limbs. It was bearing fruit. I knew, like you do in dreams, that I was in the Garden of Eden, and this was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Beside me stood Adam and Eve, both naked and afraid. That's when I noticed I was naked, and cold, and scared also. I could feel the cold wind against my skin. Suddenly, vines shot up the tree. Giant, Jack and the beanstalk vines with giant foot-long thorns protruding outwards from them. The vines spiraled all the way up the tree, strangling it. The thorns on the vines jutted out in every angle, making the vines impossible to climb. I saw glistening liquid dripping from the tips of the thorns. Somehow, I just knew it was poison and would kill me on contact. Then I heard a voice from far up in the tree. Adam and Eve and I looked up to see a gigantic snake staring down from the tree branches, the snake's massive red eyes glowing down at us like spotlights.
No salvation for you.
The snake hissed down at us, venom in its throat.
God has forsaken you, and we will all burn together.
I woke up, shaking and terrified. But unlike most dreams that fade upon waking, I felt the nightmare grow stronger upon waking. It felt like there was a presence in the room with me now. Think of the feeling you got when your teacher asked you to do a problem on the chalkboard and you could feel the entire class staring at your back. Or when you walk by a yard with an aggressive dog in it, the dog only kept away by a fence. You can feel the violent intent directed towards you. You can feel the eyes on you. It felt like it was in my closet, or in the dark corner, or maybe on the roof above me, or it could be peeking at me from the foot of my bed. This was when the waking nightmare began. I was scared all the time. There always felt like a malicious presence was around me. I was always cold and lethargic. The cold was a lonely cold. I felt like hope had been stripped from me. I could not think of anything happy or warm. My optimistic childhood mindset had been ripped out of me. No matter how much I tried, my mind always returned to the hopeless and lost feeling. I just didn't have the mental maturity to fight through it. From what I can recall, this went on for at least 6 months. My parents noticed something was different, and when I told them how I felt, they just thought I had been spooked by a scary movie and I would get over it. So a couple of lonely and scared months passed. I talked rarely and always wanted to be around someone so I didn't feel alone with the presence. I think I started getting better when summer ended and I went back to school. For most of the day, I was surrounded by classmates and friends, but the darkness always returned to my heart when I got home. Soon as I crossed the threshold, it felt like the cold weight of despair had dropped inside my stomach, making me weak and sullen. Finally, my brain started telling me that I wasn't in danger. I always felt like I was about to be hurt, like I was a prisoner with a guillotine hanging over my head. But after months, I realized there was no danger, only the feelings of dread. I started trying to take back my life. I started to ignore the unyielding feeling of despair and emptiness. But this only made things worse. YouTube, Google, and even MySpace weren't a thing yet, there was nobody to teach me about hauntings, and nobody who would really listen. Most of all, there was nobody to teach me about shadow people. I think ignoring whatever entity upset it. Like a petulant child, it wanted all of my attention. So it started acting out more. It started trying to get me afraid again. It began trying to steal my joy. It was trying to get me to think about it every day, trying to get me to worship it in its own vile way. So let me set the scene for you. The hallway outside my room ran to a small foyer area where the front door was located. From the foyer, you had two options. The doorway to the left that ran through the living room, or the door on your right that led through a dining room area. From each of these rooms, you could continue into the kitchen and the side entrance. Also during this time, there was a string of burglaries and auto-burglaries in the neighborhood. The neighborhood was on high alert, and my dad feared our house was too vulnerable, because the side entrance had a door with a big glass window. My dad feared a burglar could easily look in to see everything, and break the window to unlock it. I was 12 at this time. I was a scrawny, acne-ridden kid, and I knew it. So I had a plan if I saw a burglar. I would yell in a deep voice, pretending to be bigger and tougher than I was. So keep that in mind. I would always walk through the living room when going to the kitchen. The lights in the living room needed to be replaced, so they would flicker a couple of times before turning on. I hated that, because every time I hit the switch, I swear I could see something moving in the darkness. Then the light would come on to reveal nothing. During the strobe effect, I would only see the figure when it was dark. The figure would duck behind the couch, be sitting on the love seat or crouched on the carpet. All this kept up for weeks. I didn't want to think it was supernatural. I wanted it to be a trick of the light. I wanted all the spirit stuff behind me. I wanted to grow up and not be afraid of silly things like ghosts and demons. But it got to the point that I would look down as the light blinked and only lifted my head once it fully clicked on. One night, I didn't look down. I was back in my parents' room talking with my dad. He suddenly asked me to go get him a soda from the kitchen. I was in a good mood and in a hurry to get back to the conversation with my dad. I ran and flicked on the light, looking straight ahead. As the light flickered on and off, I saw the pure black outline of a 7-foot-tall man. It stood in the middle of the room facing me head on, like it was challenging me. What made this different was when the light was on, it didn't disappear. And when the light was off, I could still see its black outline against the darkness around it. Think of it this way. Take a cardboard cutout of a person, spray paint it black, and put it in a non-lit room. The dark cutout would still stand out against its surroundings. You would be able to see it because it was darker than its surroundings. The thing just stood there, blacker than black, flaunting its existence to me. Being confronted with this, my brain screamed, "It's real! It's really here! So it has to be a burglar!" In my fake deep voice, I screamed, "Hey, asshole! What are you doing in here?" The thing stood there for a while, and I was hit with a sudden realization that it wasn't a man, but a featureless shadow. It slowly floated backwards, never turning from me, as the light flickered. It eventually drifted around the corner, into the kitchen, and out of my view. Only then did the lights turn on. My dad heard me scream and came running. I told him I saw a person so I wouldn't look crazy. My dad searched the house and checked the side door. The door was still locked. Let's just say that my parents didn't take me very serious with the spooky stuff. It was only 10 years later that my mom admitted something supernatural was happening, but that's its own story. And my dad half admitted that the house felt different. Even now, I can't explain it. I thought maybe I was hallucinating or had mental problems. I'm not saying these things are a blessing, but at least I could get medication or do something to help end the nightmare. I don't want any of this to be real. I hope one day I can debunk all of it. I never saw the shadow people anywhere else but the parsonage. And worst of all, family and friends started seeing them too. I have a lot more stories in the parsonage, and I'm willing to share them if there is any interest. As promised, I have more stories to tell about my childhood at the parsonage. I'm going to try and cover a couple of years, so forgive me if it seems like I'm jumping around. After I saw the shadow person standing in my living room, things got a lot worse. I started experiencing hardcore sleep paralysis, or I would have incredibly realistic lucid dreams. In my dreams, I would get up, get ready for school, go to the car with my mom, and then be right back in bed. This cycle would repeat over and over. The dreams would be so real that I would check to see if I was dreaming during my dream. My reflection was the same. I could feel the soles of my feet on the ground. I could read text messages on my phone. I've heard you're not supposed to be able to read in dreams, but my brain didn't get the memo. As frustrating as the repeating Groundhog's Day dreams were, they had nothing on the dreams with the hag. I would open my eyes, unable to move, a prisoner to my bed. I would hear her first. She did the croaking things like the girl on The Grudge, except it was a little more vocal. She would crawl across the floor to the foot of my bed. I would feel her cold, cold body against mine as she crawled under the covers towards my face. She looked a lot like the Grudge girl, except she was Caucasian and only had whites for eyes. Her smell was a damp, rancid smell, like the dumpster behind a seafood restaurant. She would place her hands on my face and dig into me with her long nails. Thankfully, that's when I would wake up. When I finally awoke, I would be confused, aggravated, and scared. I remember having goosebumps from her cold touch. When it was nighttime, I would wake up from nightmares to see shadow people in my room. As I blinked to adjust to the dark, they would disappear. This happened nightly. One shadow person even appeared right in my face at the edge of my bed when I heard a loud popping noise that woke me up. I struck out an instinct only to see my hand disappear into the black mass before the shadow vanished and I could see my arm again. On a separate occasion, I could hear the deafening scream coming from my weight bench. I jolted awake and saw a shadow sitting on my weight bench looking at me. I could feel hate and anger pouring out of it towards me. I remember laying in bed, trying to keep my eyes closed, only for my bed to start breathing in and out, like I was lying on the chest of a giant. I would hear her random loud taps against the walls and heavy footsteps, sometimes soft moans. It was all a part of the torture. The sleep deprivation and constant stress made me feel like I was going crazy. But life went on. I still had to get up every day. I just had to accept the supernatural was being natural. And there would be long times of no activity. But I have to say, I was glad when others started experiencing things. My across-the-street neighbor was one of my best friends. Me and another mutual friend, Brian, had just returned from hanging out across the street. No cars were under the carport, meaning my mom and dad were out. So when we came in, we were being loud, goofy middle schoolers. There was a vanity with a mirror in the foyer that faced the dining room and kitchen. As we walked down the hallway, we could clearly see our reflections in the kitchen behind us. In the reflection, my mom walked up behind us to a kitchen counter and leaned over it. It was as clear as day. She had her glasses on, her purse, and a little notepad she carried around. "Oh, Mom, I thought you were gone," I said as I turned around. Nothing was there. And I thought I had imagined it, like how you think you see something if you pass a doorway quick enough. But Brian's face was pale. He saw her too. He told me she was leaning over the counter with her notepad. Let's just say we decided to go back over to our friend's house. What sort of entity was this, that it used my mom's likeness to scare me? I had a step-nephew, more like a little brother. He was 5 years younger than me and annoying as hell, but I loved him. He would stay over and sleep on a mattress in my room. I was 13 and had my own room by now. There was the weight bench with at least 250 pounds on it in the corner of the room. I had put all the weights on the bar to clean up the floor, plus it had 50 more pounds on the leg lift. So, hyper-annoying nephew won't go to sleep, keeps talking, keeps wanting stories. So I start telling him all the scary stuff so he will be scared and quiet. I get onto it and give every creepy detail. His face started looking more and more frightened as the story continued. All of a sudden, the weight bench that was across the room rocks like it had been kicked. The metal weights all clang together, making a loud racket. Above the weight bench, a small blue orb winked into existence and shot up into the roof. We agreed to change the subject and maybe watch a comedy movie. There was an instance when the windows in the front dining room had somebody knocking at them as I did homework. I ran to the window and clearly saw the back of my friend's head while he ducked down. I called across the street to get his older brother to come and get him or help me scare him back. As I stood looking out the window to his house, I heard my friend answer. He had no idea what I was talking about. He even came to his window and waved at me. I had been watching his house the whole time. Finally, when I was around 17 or 18, I was in my room trying to sleep. I've always been religious and was praying. I heard a loud, clear growl about 3 feet from me. At this point in my life, I was sick of it and started cursing at whatever it was. My mom opened the door to see what was wrong and to scold me for dropping multiple F-bombs. She told me she heard the growl from the hallway. It was so clear she thought it was from my video games and I was cursing into my headset. There is a last thing that I could use help with if somebody knows what this is. I was woken up again in my room, and in my closet was a glowing white face with black holes for eyes. It looked like one of those masquerade or drama masks. It looked almost identical to the very last scene of Insidious 3, when the psychic lady sees the white face in her home right before the credits. Except this was years before. And director's commentary says the writers got a lot of inspiration from real accounts of the paranormal. If anybody knows the meaning or significance, please message me. It's been one of the countless questions on my mind for years. Well, that's all for my high school and middle school days. I wish it would have ended there, but there is one last terrifying chapter to this story. What happens when a boy who's haunted meets a girl who's haunted too? I'm going to have to tread lightly on this one. The story revolves a lot around my ex-girlfriend, and we didn't end on good terms. It's been over a decade now, and I'm pretty sure it's all water under the bridge for the both of us. But I have no way of contacting her to ask her for permission to tell her story, so I'll have to keep it vague so I don't blow up her spot. After high school, I thought I was free of my haunted home. I planned to join the Marines and be gone for at least 4 years. Well, without getting into too much detail, I got hurt in boot camp, and this led to the corpsmen finding out about another medical problem I had lied about to join up. Don't think me scummy. This is pretty common practice among recruiters. I was told to tell the MEPs I was as fit as Captain America so I could ship out. I was desperate to leave and serve my country during the height of both wars on terror. But stress fractures in my shins led to more problems, and that led me coming back home. You can see how the anger and depression started again. I felt trapped, like the parsonage was a black hole sucking me back in. There I was, starting from square one again. Like most 18 to 19-year-olds, I was trying to figure out my life. That's when I met Ashley, and we started dating. We knew each other back in the day and reconnected later in life. The biggest obstacle we had was she lived 2 hours away. My parents tried to work with us. She could come stay the weekend, but I had to respect my parents' rules and sleep in a separate room from hers. I didn't mind. It was their house, their rules. Other times, I went to stay at her apartment, and that's when the weirdness started. First off, I noticed she slept with multiple layers of blankets, still had a nightlight and a collection of stand-up comedy CDs and stereo right next to her bed. Every time I slept there, she put me on the side closest to the closet. I would have sleep paralysis every night, but these were a little different. I was sharing the point of view of something in the closet, looking at me sleeping. I could see myself asleep, and I could feel the anger directed towards me from the entity. I would float closer to my sleeping face and begin cursing in an unknown hateful language. I felt the jealousy of the entity. I felt the anger toward myself because I was in its way. When I woke up, I would usually spring out of bed. That habit hadn't worn off from boot camp yet. This would scare Ashley because she knew what was happening. She finally told me what was happening to her and her roommate's sister. She said they had seen a shadow stalking them ever since they were children. She had the multiple blankets because she could feel it caressing her at night. The comedy CDs because she could hear her name being whispered and the nightlight was obvious. I know what you're thinking. This is the plot to the Paranormal Activity movies. This all happened in 2006 to 2007. The movie came out in 2009. Anyways, she told me she only slept good when I was there because I was taking all the heat from whatever it was instead of her. I kind of felt like a white knight, saving Milady from demons, so I just rolled with it. But the longer we were together, the worse it got back home. I remember distinctly one night when I drove home from her apartment in the middle of the night. I had to work the next day, so I had to leave around 3 a.m. I was on a dark stretch of highway between cities and trying to stay awake. I started to feel something pushing against the back of my seat. It reminded me of when my friends would mess with me by kicking or kneeing my seat while driving. I tried to ignore it as me being tired, but it got to the point where it was impossible to ignore. It felt like somebody's knees were pressing so hard I was almost touching the steering wheel. I never looked back. That's what it wanted. I knew it was waiting for me to turn around so it could do something to me. How easy would it have been to crash and just be chalked up as me falling asleep at the wheel? So I rolled down the windows and blared Christian music the whole way back. Things came to a head at my house when my parents said Ashley could come over for the weekend. It was a Thursday and I okayed it with her on the phone. That night, the shadows came back. I would wake up in the middle of the night to see 2 of them standing behind the chair in my room. They would fade away the longer I stared at them, but they were making their presence known. She came over Friday and I let her have my bed while I slept in the living room. Around 3 a.m., she came sneaking in to see me. I thought she was up for some rule breaking at first, but then I noticed she had been crying and was shaking. I've seen something in your room, she told me. Are they standing behind the chair? I asked. Her eyes widened in surprise. How did you know? I agreed to sleep in the same room as her, but I slept on the floor in case my parents caught me. I was on the ground speaking up to her on the bed, and somewhere I said, "Oh shit. Oh shit," was repeated back to me in my own voice from under the bed right next to me. I kind of freaked out and sat up, but I could see she was starting to cry again, so I played it off. The same sleep paralysis that night, except I looked down at myself sleeping by the bed. From the creature's point of view, I could see 2 black boots on my head. Hate and twisted insults spilled out in a guttural voice. We were both immature and broke and far away from each other, so the relationship ended badly. I still regret the hateful things I told her when we were fighting, but one last thing happened before things ended. I was at her apartment again. She was begging me to stay, but I couldn't because of work. She told me she was scared to be alone. As I was comforting her, I saw a glowing orb, like a bubble with yellow in the middle, appearing behind her and shoot off to the ceiling. I had just told her that God would protect her when this thing appeared. It was in a fully lit room, and it was the most blatant thing I had seen since the shadow person in my living room years ago. It was the entity saying, "No, he won't." I'm not in contact with her anymore, but sometimes I think of her and worry. I'm not missing our relationship. It was pretty toxic, but I worry about her hauntings. Life is hard enough without the extra layer of demonic oppression or whatever it was. Well, say a prayer for her. Maybe one for me. The spooky shit has dropped off for over a decade now. I hope talking about it doesn't stir it back up. During an evening dissection at medical school in 1803, Pendleton wiped the bloodied scalpel against his leather apron. He and his instructor Hawthorne were slicing the chest of a cadaver stolen from a nearby graveyard. "All right, this is the location of the heart and the arteries," Hawthorne said while pointing to the chest. "We must use a bow and saw to get at them." A shouting crowd interrupted before they could crack the ribs. "Show your face, you coward," they said. "You ain't stealing no more bodies from the grave." Pendleton hinted to Hawthorne that he wanted to address the crowd. He walked over to the windowsill and peered out at them. At first glance, they carried pitchforks and torches like a typical 19th century mob. Looking closer, he noticed they wore muddy formal clothes. Their faces were decayed at different degrees of severity. Some had pale skin ripe for putrefaction. Others had completely rotted noses or lips. "Look at these people," Pendleton told Hawthorne, who had joined him by the windowsill. "They don't look alive." A distinguished man who was the leader of the undead crowd stepped forward. His face was decayed to the point where his flesh was bluish-brown. He wore a tricorn hat and kerchief above a waistcoat. "You fellas up there," he said to them, "I want to proclaim that you have taken too many corpses from our graveyard." At first, Pendleton didn't know what to say down to the leader. Then he thought of something sensible. "Yes, we did take perhaps 2 or 3 corpses, sir," he said. "But we did it in good faith, to help man further his understanding of anatomy." The leader didn't like the excuse. The undead crowd became more inflamed. "We don't care what you proclaim," the leader said. "We had our weekly graveyard resident soul gathering and decided enough was enough." He raised his trembling index finger, shaming Pendleton. It was bluish-brown like his face. "How about we give you a dissection so you can make your own contribution to the study of human anatomy?" Pendleton panicked. "What shall we do?" he asked. "Maybe we should block the doors with old furnishings if they try to attack us." Hawthorne wasn't afraid of the mob. "Don't worry about the dead outside," he said. "Don't worry about a mob of undead creatures, you say?" "Yes, they're merely trying to intimidate us. Ever since I first stole cadavers from the grave 12 years ago, they've been threatening me. First they came in small groups, then in large numbers. Later, they came with battle swords and said they would decapitate me in my sleep." "So, you mean this is all to scare us?" Hawthorne nodded. "All you see are spirits." He then pointed beyond the undead. "Look over there, at that street sweeper beside the lamppost. He continues to work because he doesn't see them." Pendleton was relieved. I was 19 years old the first time I branded a live human. My father is a meticulously talented metal fabricator. He is also one of the craziest, most fascinating and intelligent people I know. So when he called me one Saturday afternoon and said he had handcrafted a brand and trusted his one and only daughter to do the deed, I was in. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity I just couldn't pass up. How many people do you know that can say, "I branded my dad"? Now, I have to admit, I was definitely apprehensive at first. There's a lot of pressure involved with being responsible for pressing a scorching red, hot piece of sharp metal against someone's skin, which will leave a permanent mark on their body for the rest of their life. We cracked a few beers and took a few shots with my best friend and a few of his roommates while the brand rested in the flaming coals. It took about an hour for the brand to get legitimately red hot. After one last shot for luck, he braced himself up against the back deck. I gloved up in some heat-resistant gear and lined up the brand ready to sear the deed. It was an exhilarating feeling, and I really wasn't anticipating that fact. When I pressed the brand to his skin, I moved quickly and swiftly, because any faltering in my movements would leave scars that would show for life. I let the brand rest there for maybe 3 to 5 seconds once it landed, and pulled it away just as quickly as I had placed it. It all happened so fast, but I was seeing it in slow motion. The smoke rising from his skin. The sizzling sound reminded me of bacon on a Sunday morning. Honestly, it kind of smelt the same too. I didn't hate it. Actually, I loved it. I'm 31 now, and in the years since, it healed alright, but has admittedly faded over time. It's never perfect the first time, but that was by no means the last time I branded someone. I have had countless people ask me to brand them, and even got into the hobby of fabricating personalized brands. People who have paid for my services describe their fascination with branding the same as those who get tattoos, piercings, or scarification. It is a form of art on the body. Their body is my canvas, and I am happy to be the artist that decorates them. I am equally addicted to the art of branding as those who ask me to do so. As we are all well aware, COVID-19, also known as coronavirus, hit this year. This put a massive hit in my branding business, So much so that the last client I had was in September of 2019. By April of this year, 2020, I had the itch to produce another brand so bad that I felt like ripping my hair out. In the fashion of social distancing, I had picked up the habit of daily walks to avoid the cabin fever. I had a few different locations I would frequent, and one of them was the local cemetery. It was always silent and solitary, and I liked it. Once, when I was walking through the cemetery, I noticed a funeral in progress and kept my respectful distance. As I was leaving to head back home was when the thought of the cemetery occurred to me. The cemetery. It's full of fresh-ish bodies that were ripe for the branding. It's not like anyone would ever see them again. They'd just go back in the ground when I was done with them. I hatched a plan. I waited until around 3:30 in the morning to head back to the cemetery. Just enough time for the drunks to be off the road. So easy for me to avoid the cops, and just a little too early for the morning workers to have headed out. Incognito at best. I go to work, and was able to dig through the fresh dirt to the body underneath fairly quickly since it wasn't even fully buried yet. While I was busy digging away, I had set a handheld blowtorch aflame to set the blades aglow on what was now my signature brand. Literally, it was my signature as a brand. Finally, I reached the coffin and cracked the lid. I almost felt bad, but it was too perfect. I just couldn't pass this up. I gently lifted their shirt. I gently lifted the brand. I quickly turned off the torch, and I just as quickly pressed the brand to the corpse's skin. The sizzle, the smoke, the adrenaline all rushed back to me, and it was glorious. I continued this pattern of behavior for a few months. I would scout the local cemeteries for new burials each day on my walks, and then at night I would make my night runs to brand and dash. I had decided to exclusively use my signature brand. It was sad. I had created the brand in October of 2019, hoping to really kickstart my business taking off. But because of the Rona, I had yet to be able to use it. Now, I was getting to use it over and over and leave my mark everywhere. My body count was up to 13. A major problem arose this past week. I was doing my daily scouting when I saw a person approaching me from the opposite direction. The first thing that tipped me off that there was a problem is that the person wasn't wearing a face mask. It's also late October in upstate Ohio, and the person was also wearing a dress. As they drew closer, they pulled out a pair of scissors from seemingly nowhere, cut a slit into the dress where their stomach was. And it hit me like a nuclear bomb. My signature was on their stomach. This was not possible. No living person had that brand. I had only used it on the dead. The next day, there were 2 people who walked past exposing my brand. The day after that, it was 4. I recognized their faces. I couldn't look them in the face. They never approached me or attempted to interact with me in any way, but they also made sure to show me my brand, regardless of where I had placed it on their person. I stopped scouting that day, and I haven't returned to the cemetery since. The next night, I heard banging at my door for a few hours. I was terrified to see what it was. I never left my bed. Yesterday, the banging lasted all day and all night. I sat stone still on my couch, eyes not leaving the television, hoping that eventually I would wake up and all my terrible deeds and everything resulted from it would turn out to just be a dream. Now we've arrived at today's events. Just before dawn, the banging on my door began. Suddenly, the door burst open and they rushed in. All 13 of the deceased whom I had branded made their way into my door, brands and torches in their hands. There was a large struggle between them and I. But I've been chained by the ankles to this steel metal chair since morning. It's dark outside now. It has been dark for a long time. The chair has slowly been heating up, and it's starting to get uncomfortable. But I can't get up. They have all taken turns, one by one, emblazing me with their own personal brands. I don't know how long I'll be here. I don't know how many times I will be branded. I don't even think I'm recognizable at this point. What goes around comes around, I guess. As a college freshman, I had planned to come home for Thanksgiving. I had 2 younger siblings, Grace, who was in the 6th grade, and Liam, who was in the 8th grade, so I knew my parents were always busy, and I would only call them once a week. I am the older sister, being that I'm 18 years old. I had called my parents the previous Thursday to let them know that I would be home the following Thursday, which would be Thanksgiving Day around 10 a.m. Thursday came and I left Penn State main campus at around 7 a.m. to be home in Philadelphia at around 10 a.m. When I got home, I was expecting to be greeted by my annoying younger siblings. But instead, there was dead silence and a note on the dining room table that said, "Dear Alice, your father and I decided to move with your brother and sister to Florida. You can come and go from the house anytime you want, because we have no plans on selling the house. Love, Mom." I felt like I was punched in the stomach. I immediately called my mother and heard the generic voice message where, "Sorry, but the phone number you're trying to reach is no longer in service. Goodbye." I then called my father and received the same message. I was confused and perplexed. I felt completely abandoned. I called my Aunt Reba, and she apologized to me and said her sister, who was my mother, gave her very little details other than they wanted to start over in Florida, and they didn't leave an address. I've never heard anything like this before. My parents weren't mad or anything else at me the last time we talked. I looked throughout the house and it definitely looked like they had moved out with no intentions of coming back. I called the police and about a half hour later a detective had showed up. I told the detective that I came home for Thanksgiving break. There was a brief note that my family moved to Florida and my parents gave me no information on where they moved to or an explanation on why they had moved. The detective asked permission to search the house, which I allowed. The detective said, "I searched the house. I found no evidence of a crime. Because of that, there's nothing we can do." I replied, "How do you know they weren't kidnapped or killed or something?" The detective replied, "Well, since you have a note with your aunt corroborating the story, what's the crime? On top of that, there's no evidence in the house that a crime occurred." I said, "Well, they gave me no notice, no reason why they left." The detective said, "You're 18. Their legal obligations towards you is over. Though this situation sounds extremely harsh and a bit cruel, there has been no crime committed." The detective then asked, "What about your parents or your siblings' email or social media accounts?" I said, "The social media accounts were taken down and I haven't gotten an email response from any of them. My dad has his own IT business, which is almost impossible to track down because he doesn't advertise. The detective said, "Well, I hate to say this, but it sounds like your parents wanted to separate from you. Call me if you come across any evidence that would suggest a crime had occurred." The detective had left, and here I am, 18 years old during Thanksgiving, and I'm now completely alone. I look online to try and find similar situations to what is happening to me, and I find nothing. Also, I have to assume that I'm going to be completely cut off financially. I'm going to have to get a full-time job, but at least my loans will keep me in college. I'll transfer to one of the branch campuses to make it easier to find a job, and it would be a bit cheaper living in this house versus paying rent. I asked my neighbor if they had seen or heard anything. My neighbor replied, "Yeah, there was a big unmarked truck that came, with guys who were putting stuff from your house into the truck. I thought your parents are doing fall cleaning and donating old stuff away. I hadn't seen either of your parents since last week." I thought to myself, whoever those movers were knew not to take any of my stuff, which my parents or someone else had to tell them. I thought through these events that had transpired to see if there was anything I had missed. I called my brother and sister's school district, and the principal said the receptionist received a phone call from a person who identified herself as my siblings' mother, who said they were moving to Florida, where my siblings were going to be homeschooled. I thought to myself, either the detective was right, where my parents wanted to completely disassociate from me, or this is a very carefully orchestrated crime. My mother hadn't worked in months, so I couldn't question her employer. I always thought my father's job was boring, and I never really paid attention to who his clients were, so I don't know who to contact regarding my father. I'm now completely out of thoughts on what to do or what avenues I should pursue. I went back to the main campus to finish the semester. I got a part-time job at the university and a part-time job at the bar. I would check my emails constantly, and still no response from any of my family members. My parents had paid off the mortgage, so I would just have to pay the utilities and the taxes. It's now December, and the fall semester had finished. I drove back to Philadelphia with a car which probably wouldn't last much longer. My parents' house was in the desirable historic district, whose property value had skyrocketed over the years. The area was also prone to break-ins, so I always felt weary about sleeping in the house alone. Being a female, it was extremely creepy going into my parents' house with no one else being there. I unpacked all of my things from college. I was hoping that one of my friends would move in with me and pay rent. As nighttime approached, the quietness of the house became more and more creepy. It's now 2 a.m. and I'm upstairs in my room playing with my phone because I can't sleep. I hear an unsettling sound from downstairs. I swore I heard the front door close. Then I heard the most terrifying sounds imaginable. I heard footsteps on the hardwood floors. I became paralyzed in fear. I know I have to do something. I pull myself together and quietly sneak into my closet. I lay down and put the spare sheets and blankets over me. Then I hear a click-clack as the footsteps come up the stairs. I can't see this person, so I don't know who this person is. I try to hold my breath, so whoever this unknown person is can't hear me. My heart jumps out of my chest as the unknown person walks towards the closet door. The door opens, and I stay as still as a tree. The unknown person then turns and walks away. Then the person does a quick look through the other rooms upstairs, and then proceeds to leave the house. After hyperventilating, I call the police. They take down my statement and kind of brush me off, because whoever came into the house most likely had a key, because there were no signs of forced entry, and there was also nothing taken from the house. I had to go to Home Depot in the morning and change out all the locks. It took me forever, and I spent money I really didn't have, but at least I felt safer now. The odd thing is whoever the person was probably had a key, and the person went straight to my room. If it was one of my family members, I would think they would see my car and at least call out my name. I had to suspect that the unknown person who was in the house was there to harm me, which made me all the more terrified of being in the house alone. I went the next day to the ASPCA to adopt a dog. I now felt a little better with having Buster in the house. I would hope he would at least bark to scare the intruder away. I wish I knew where in Florida my parents moved. It's such a big state that it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack without knowing at least the city. Everything is just so weird. First, my parents abandoned me, and now someone might be looking to harm me. I couldn't rule out that something sinister happened to my family, but someone would have to know the passwords to their social media accounts to be able to disable them, as well as the other personal information. But why? Was the question I kept asking myself. Why would someone want to harm my parents? Or why would my parents abandon me? Either question was plausible, and I'm not sure which one I preferred more, of either being abandoned or that someone harmed them. My Aunt Reba was the only family I had left. I would visit her about once a week. I tried to brainstorm with her all the possibilities of what was going on. I'm also not completely naive. The only person who is not a suspect is me if something did happen to my family. But what would the motive be? Then it dawned on me. How could I be so stupid? My parents' house is worth $500,000, which is a hell of a return on an investment considering they only spent $30,000 for it. If I'm dead, then someone could lay claim to the house. I thought it was odd how my Aunt Reba doesn't reach out to me unless I make the effort, and she never told me about my parents moving until I approached her. But what would be her motive? She has no kids. She's a retired school teacher, so she has a pension, and she has a house that's as equally as valuable as my parents. Logically, she would be able to figure out all my parents' passwords, which more than likely my mother probably inadvertently told Reba over the year. She also has a key to my parents' house. I'm now convinced that my aunt is responsible for my parents' disappearance, and now it's time to catch the rat. Jealousy and greed were the only motives that I could think of why Reba killed my family. With the new locks, I gave Reba a spare to the house. One of my old shady boyfriends lent me his stolen handgun. First, I want to approach Reba and let her know that I was aware of her scheme and she needed to tell me where my parents' bodies are buried. So I went to Reba's house. I left my gun at home. She answered the door and I said, "I know it was you. You killed my parents." She replied, "Dear, I would never hurt anyone on top of killing my own sister and her kids." I said, "Don't play games. You are the only logical person. Tell me what you did to my family, and I'll give you time to leave before I call the cops." She said, "Dear, please leave now. Those are some serious allegations you're alleging." I said, "Fine, but eventually I'll figure out what you did to my family." Then I left. Christmas is only 2 days away, and I have never felt so depressed and lonely. I try to fall asleep, but I can't. As I start to doze off, once again I hear that terrifying sound of someone coming through the front door. I'm as equally as scared as the last time this happened. I grab my gun and hide in the closet. I'm an 18-year-old girl who's never harmed anyone. I don't know if it's my aunt, one of her goons, or someone else. I hear the click-clack sounds of steps coming up the stairs. I am now shaking in terror in the closet. I hear the footsteps come to my room, then towards the closet. I have the gun pointed at the closet door. As the footsteps approach the closet door, I unload 6 shots and yell out in pure horror. Then I hear a big thump, and I cautiously open the door. It's my aunt. I see that one of the bullets hit her in the forehead. I feel a sense of relief and a sense of sadness. I'm now hysterically crying in a fetal position on the floor. I think to myself, 2 months ago, I was just an ordinary freshman. Now my family is presumed dead, and I just killed my aunt, who was probably their killer. I call the police, and the coroner comes and takes my dead aunt away. I'm questioned down at the police precinct. The police aren't as understanding as I thought they would be. I told them all of the circumstantial evidence I had against my aunt. The police questioned why I gave my aunt a key, and also that my aunt had no weapons on her when I shot her. Also, there was no proof that my family is dead or that my aunt had anything to do with their disappearance. I left the police station, and I was told that I would have to meet with the Attorney General for further questioning and possible charges. I went to my parents' house and fell asleep on the couch from pure exhaustion. It's Christmas Eve, and I'm extremely depressed. I doze off into a deep sleep, and I'm awakened by knocks on the front door. I figure it's the police, so I open the door. As I open the door, I see my parents. Then everything goes blank. I wake up on the couch with my family hovering over me. I must have fainted, I thought to myself. Then I say, Mom, Dad, Grace, Liam, am I dreaming? My mother says, No, honey, it's us. Then I say, Where were you guys? What happened? My mother responded, Well, we decided that we had enough of everything in Philadelphia, so we went to Florida. I said, Why didn't you tell me? Why did you leave me? My father said, Well, honey, we wanted you to grow up. You were too reliant on us for everything. I said, What? I'm an 18-year-old kid. All of my friends are like me. My father then said, Compared to me and your mother, when we were your age, our parents had much higher expectations, and we weren't allowed to just be 18-year-old kids. Then I said, I killed Aunt Reba last night. I thought she had killed you guys. My mom said, What? And then she broke down and started crying. My father said, Oh my God, what did you do? Why? Then I started to cry hysterically and I couldn't talk anymore. My parents moved back to Philadelphia. The district attorney offered me a plea deal for killing my aunt. I would have to spend at least a year in prison and spend 10 years on parole. I accepted the deal, and I was expected to report to prison on January 2nd. I thought to myself it was like I made a deal with the devil in exchange for getting my family back. Prison was as miserable as I thought it would be, but at least my family visited me once a week. I have served 6 months so far, and it feels like 20 years. At least my parents were visiting today, I thought. I was happy to see my parents. As backwards as their parenting style is, at least I had them. We were finishing up our meeting, and my mother said, Sorry, dear, we're not going to be able to visit you for a while. Then my mother said, Well, with the money we got from your aunt's house, we're going to travel the country. Then it hit me. My head started to spin, like I was in a different galaxy. I regained my senses and said, "You fucking snakes! You planned this from the very beginning! You lined everything up to make me think Aunt Reba killed you guys for your house. But instead, you set me up to kill her. You gutless, rotten snakes! I hate the both of you!" Then they both facetiously grinned at me, and my mother said, "Goodbye, dear." At first, it was fun. I enjoyed the game that was being played with my body. When they first swept me away from my little room in rural South Dakota, I may have been a little frightened. Who wouldn't be? But then, as always, fear of the unknown can give way to unexpected pleasure. And when you live in a small town where it's difficult to find a guy willing to even use a pinky finger, a guy can get desperate. That first night was a little freaky, I won't lie. I remember being lifted from my bed and an incredibly bright light waking me up. There was a pulling sensation from my solar plexus, and I was completely unable to move. My limbs and head splayed as my body slowly rose into the air. My heart was racing, and I thought, "Oh Lord, here we go. This is it. I've become a redneck stereotype." I'm still not sure how I got through the window without breaking it. I blacked out for a small amount of time. It could have been from the shock, or it could have been that they knocked me out. They aren't the most graceful when it comes to stuff like that. But when I awoke, I was butt naked. My arms were restrained above my head, and my legs were tied to two strange glowing things on the floor. I was suspended, my body pitched slightly forward, completely vulnerable to any intruders, if you get my meaning. Honestly, I was in a position I had always dreamed about, and I was kind of excited. That fear of being completely out of control and dying was giving me a halfie, and I tried to relax. But there was no chance of that with what followed. Two of them entered the area I was hanging in. The sight of them was so shocking I couldn't even find my voice to scream. One of them had a tray that had an assortment of strange cylindrical devices. The tray was metal. No, not quite metal. It had a weird texture, like brick, but the color of mercury. I don't know why that tray sticks out to me when it's the implements I should have been focusing on. I mean, I eventually did. I didn't have a choice, but that tray, it spoke to my soul. Anyway, while the first one was setting up the tray next to me, the second one began to fondle my body with their tentacles. Now, I tell you, my halfie turned straight into the Chrysler building. The tentacles caressed my skin all over. There was this slime that they had. But it wasn't sticky, it was gooey, more like pudding. But the feeling of that and the tentacles made my skin break out into goosebumps. A part of me thought I should have been frightened into apoplexy, but when a boy's been alone for so long, he'll take any attention he can get. I might have orgasmed at some point, but I don't remember. I know I was covered head to toe in their goo. But it was kind of comforting also. After what seemed like hours of being manhandled by those glorious greenish-blue tentacles, the other one finished whatever preparation they were doing and joined the first one in slithering across my body. Now, when I say tentacles, I mean tentacles, like those one you see octopuses have on those nature shows or in aquariums. Except they only have two like our arms, and these ones have suction cups all over, not just on the bottom. In fact, you can still see some dark red hickeys on my body from their fondling. They make me proud, if you must know. There's something about being wanted that fulfills me. So, I'm getting felt up like a dollar bill in a strip club when the first one stopped and grabbed one of the implements from the tray. I only caught a glimpse of what they were doing because my eyes were practically rolled up inside my head, but I noticed they grabbed the smaller tube. It was about 5 inches and about as thick as the top of a Coke bottle. Not a plastic one, but one of the old-timey glass bottles. The implement was smooth and pink with a little light glowing just under the surface. I didn't have much time to consider what was happening any further due to the fact that it was soon inserted into my anus. At first, there was a little pressure and pain as it worked against my tight sphincter, but they were kind enough to coat the probe with some of their slime before slipping the little pink bugger inside me. I tell you, my mind exploded. In a good way. You know, living alone in the middle of a field where the nearest bar is about 45 minutes away, I'd experiment, of course. I'd use the objects you'd think. Carrots, parsnips. Sometimes if I was feeling particularly frisky, I'd see how far I could get with a small cucumber. But none of that compared to the warm tingle that erupted across every inch of my alien goo-soaked body as the probe slowly went deeper into my cavity. I was in love. I'm not kidding either. I felt so much love for those two creatures as they continued to stroke my body. No one had made me feel so complete. I know I orgasmed that time. I think they may have collected the result for study. Soon after that, they removed the exploratory device from inside me and conked me out again. When I woke up, I was ass up in cornfield down the street from my house. A skunk staring at me. Part of me was a little sad thinking they had finished with me and that I wouldn't see them again. But I was happily wrong. It was about a week before they came for me again. The second time was very much like the first time, except I think it was a different creature. I could tell they weren't the same as before because the texture of their slime felt a little bit different. I didn't mind, though. Knowing that I was wanted and needed made me feel like a new boy. The device was a little thicker this time, but I opened up easily and accepted. And so it went for a couple months. Luckily, the visits became more and more frequent and the probes became bigger and bigger. I'd never felt more in love in my entire life. I soon got to figuring out who was tickling me and when. They were always gentle, and I could tell they cared about me. It had to be about the 50th time they came for me. I kept a calendar above my headboard where I'd mark off the dates they came for me, when something unfortunate happened. We had finished up that night with a particularly large probe. I've never been certain what information they were trying to get out of me, but we'd worked up to the largest device yet. It was about 12 inches in length and about the thickness of my wrist. Now, mind you, I have skinny wrists, but they're thick for inserting into a butthole. As always, it felt exquisite going in, but it seems my body was unable to keep with our sexual calisthenics. Upon removal, it seemed more came out than intended. I heard a slurp and a slap, and looked down to see my large intestine on the ground between my legs. My small intestine was following close behind. I had, according to some internet research, prolapsed. Now I was feeling high from the night's orgasm, and it felt better than I'd ever felt before, so I wasn't quite sure how to react. I just stared at the pile of guts that lay there. My lovers seemed quite concerned and quickly moved into action. I think I was still smiling like a fool as they put me under. When I came to, I was still naked and lying on a slab. None of my lovers were around, and I thought it odd they didn't replace me back home like they normally did. It took me a moment to remember what had happened, and I quickly used my fingers to explore my back door. There was a cool metallic feeling where my hole had been. When I pressed down on my torso, there was a hard feeling like my insides were replaced by mechanical parts. I smiled. My lovers loved me so much they gave me a bionic butthole. It was that moment that an idea entered my pretty head. I slowly moved off the operating slab and exited the door to the room. There was a hallway with a few doors. Seems basic architecture is universal. I began to explore the ship. The first room I entered had exactly what I needed, an armory. There were a few laser beam guns hanging from the wall, and I took them. That's when I made my way here, to what seems like the navigation room or something. Y'all have to understand that it is with love that I hold this gun to your head and force you to your knees. You see, there will be no returning me to my house. We've been together for several months, and I love all of you. Every single one of you. And I know you all love me. I love exploring our love together. You fulfill me more than any garden vegetable ever could. I'm pretty sure you can understand the words I'm saying. You are more advanced than I am. It's time to take this relationship to the next level. You see, you gave me the greatest gift of eternal pleasure, and I realized that with this new metal butthole, I can take over the universe. All the probing, all the manhandling, it all led to this moment. Our love will conquer all. There is nothing that can stand in our way. But you have to understand, I'm in charge now. I'm your leader. And because of that, you have to understand that from now on, it's my way or the highway. When are you going to leave your wife? My mistress asked. I was putting on my boots. Soon, I said. On my way home, I swung by the office to pick up a new golf club I'd had delivered, then stopped by the daycare to pick up my son. That's when I saw the first wasp. I assumed it had entered the car on my son's clothes. It was particularly pesky, eluding my attempts to flush it out the windows until I had no choice but to pull over and hunt it down with a rolled-up business magazine. A hunt that ended with a very satisfying splat. The next one appeared a few days later while I was pretending to watch TV, followed by a second and third, and all three buzzed so loud I couldn't concentrate on my sexting. I had to take a break and kill them. Splat. Dozens more materialized the following week. By now, I was certain we had an infestation, but my wife insisted she hadn't seen any and my son was too young to talk. I called an exterminator. The house is clean, he said after his inspection. But it wasn't. The wasps continued to show up, day after day, in even greater numbers. Any time I was home, they buzzed relentlessly. I stopped being able to sleep. I stopped being able to concentrate. The only time I felt any peace from them was at work, where my boss increasingly micromanaged me. And in the hotel, my mistress had stepped up her nagging. It's almost been a year. Are you going to leave your wife or not? One day, I could barely take it anymore, and had to use every ounce of my self-control not to slap her across the face. When my son is a little older, I said through clenched teeth. On my wife's birthday, my wife and I took turns hiding from our son in a game of hide and seek. I hid in our shed. It was dark inside, and when the buzzing started, I suddenly felt the wasps all around me, crawling on my face and limbs. As I lurched for the exit, I felt as if I were passing through an entire atmosphere of them. I imagined them flying down my throat, devouring my eyes, numbing my tongue. I screamed, and my wife had to calm me down. It's okay, there aren't any more wasps, she repeated as she petted my hair like I was a dumb dog. I took a sabbatical from work. Because I was home all day, we canceled daycare. I checked the house incessantly for the wasp lair. I knew there was one because I had already killed thousands. That's when I saw it. My son sleeping so peacefully as a wasp exited his nostril. Another emerged from his ear. I knew what had to be done. What I had to do. Wasps buzzed. Phone buzzed. I grabbed my golf club. Splat. So far, my senior year at Doherty High was both unexciting and uninspired. 2 months in and I was still single. No friends for homecoming, never mind a real date for that matter. I was still a rebel without a cause. High school hell, the latest shitty chapter in my young life. My only real friend was my brother Danny. He was 15, younger and less smarter than me. Not to mention shorter and skinnier. But I always looked after him. Some would say my protective nature was the product of growing up in a single-parent household. But for me, it was just love. Of course, Mom did what she could. Being a teacher meant long hours for half-ass pay, but hey, we lived in a nice slice of suburbia here in Albany, Georgia. Certainly in an area much safer than the rest of this troubled city. The houses align next to each other, no fences or huge yards between us. The houses conforming to the same bland brick structure. Sadly, there weren't many kids our age out here. Never mind a hot guy. Our next-door neighbors were Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, a younger couple with no kids. They were polite and pretty, each of them with dark hair and piercing green eyes. I gotta say, Mr. Caldwell's nice physique didn't go unnoticed by me during his daily jogs. But still, shit was pretty boring. Danny and I could only hope Halloween would be better. At our age, we had no plans for trick-or-treating. Obviously, no invites to any parties. Instead, Danny and I just rode around Albany, my Halloween playlist our companion. From 5 to midnight, we cruised the streets, from MJ's Thriller to Travis's Sicko Mode. There was green and celebration. This high and all the Halloween hijinks were a blast. And with Mom out of town, there was no curfew. None she had to know about, at least. Technically, we reached November 1, but Halloween was still everywhere, man. The atmosphere all around us. Not to mention we had a Michael Myers marathon to catch up back at the house. One aided by leftover pot and those bottles of red Mom kept hidden in the cabinets. Only issue was I got hungry. This girl had to eat and the munchies weren't helping. I pulled into the driveway, pushed the long bangs away from my glasses as I faced Danny. "Well, happy Halloween, kiddo." "Hell yeah," Danny chuckled. Outside, a cold wind swept through my Nirvana tea and slight stomach. Next to me, I saw my stoned brother shivering, his good looks and dimples disrupted by the October chills. "Shit, Candace, it's cold. It's Halloween, dumbass," I teased. For the 20th time tonight, my stomach growled. God, I'm so hungry. Together, we stumbled up to the front door, our sloppy footsteps aligned and in sync. The security light seemed dimmer than usual. For once, the garage door was closed. But that didn't stop us. I grabbed the doorknob. A shock hit me, not from a scare, but surprise that this bad boy was left unlocked. "Shit," I said. Turning, I got greeted by Danny's beaming eyes, his excited expression. "What?" He smirked. I chuckled. "I told your ass to lock it." "I did. I know I did." Shaking my head, I pushed the door open slowly, keeping the creaking to a minimum. "Obviously not. Maybe Mom's home." Danny's paranoid gaze drifted over to the garage. He actually had a point, I realized. Mom did say they might get back late Halloween night. So much for escaping that curfew. I think you're right. I held the door open and saw a long, dark entryway awaiting us. I faced Danny. "So, just be quiet, all right?" "Okay," said Danny's defensive tone. Like an angry teacher, I leaned in closer, my whisper bursting at the seams. "I mean it." We stepped inside, escaping the night to enter an even darker abyss. The floor felt unfamiliar, but we traveled onward too, drunk and too stoned to turn back now. But seeing all the picture frames in the shadows reassured me. Mom always cherished those memories after all. Once we stumbled past the living room and our large flat screen, I knew we were safe and sound. The kitchen was only a few feet away. Excited, I rushed ahead of Danny and hit the lights. Through the blurred buzz, I somehow made out the towering fridge and towering pantry door. Our journey was over. For me, anyway. "What are we gonna make?" Danny asked. Don't ask me why, but I always craved breakfast food at 1 a.m. Sausage specifically. So after a quick sloppy search in what we careened through the cabinets, dived through the freezer and closet, we finally had our materials. I got to work with Danny by my side. His own Halloween playlist at a comfortable volume. These first few minutes were fun. Joyful. The midnight breakfast started cooking, simmering. Savoring the holiday spirit, I smiled at Danny. "Which one do you want to watch first?" He smirked and leaned against the table. I noticed a few plates at his fingertips. Mom must have had the same idea we did. "Let me guess. You're gonna make us watch the old Halloween, that 80s one." 1978, I teased. I turned my attention back to the food. "But we can watch the new one if..." A brutal thud erupted. Not the sound of a fallen flower pot or clumsy collapse. I'm talking a heavy drop. The thunderous thud came straight from a hallway in the corner. the one leading to our bedrooms. Danny and I stood still, scared shitless. But there was nothing else. No words, no movement. Just a hypnotic riff from the animal's house of the rising sun. A shiver ran up and down my spine there in the cold. Call it sisterly instinct, but I knew Danny wasn't in much better shape. "What the hell was that?" Danny whispered. Snapping out of his fright, he killed the music. "I don't know." With cautious steps, I approached the hallway, until Danny snatched my shoulder. "Candace, what the hell are you doing?" I hesitated. He made a point after all. In a sudden epiphany, I now emphasized with all those horror movie victims we made fun of. The power of booze and recreational drugs definitely damaged their decision-making, including mine. But what about Mom? "Mom might have fell," I said to him. Now it was Danny's turn to give pause. I grabbed a hold of his hand. "Come, let's go look," I forced a smile. "Paranoid ass. So are you," he said. We staggered out of the kitchen, back into the blackness. Stifling silence surrounded us. Upon entering the hall, we stopped, a breather we both needed. Through the tension, my heart pounded. Just think of Mom. It's just her. "Mom!" I heard Danny shout. "God damn it, Danny." I flashed him a quick glare, one he couldn't see in the darkness. "Mom, is that you?" Danny continued. Then we heard a frenetic slam. A narrow ray of light fell out, spreading across our terrified faces. The last door on the right was open. Danny clenched tighter to my hand. "That's her, right?" Fighting the fear, I looked all around the hall, but the light wasn't enough. All I could see was Mom's museum of photographs. All the outlines, that is. "There's no reason to be scared," I reminded myself. "You're home." "Come on," I reassured him. I led the charge, getting closer and closer to the back, to our mother's bedroom. The room was a furnace, stuffy, cluttered, more uncomfortable than the dread I still felt. Only a single bedside lamp was on, several magazines piled up beside it. Probably Mom's people's, I figured. The closet door in the back completely closed. Before Danny could say anything, I pulled him further within. Past the tall dresser, the heavy clumps of what appeared to be Mama's clothes littering the floor like visible landmines. Up ahead, I saw the sheets pulled tight. At least she hadn't fallen out of bed. "Mom," I finally said. Danny and I came to a stop. Then I heard Danny scream. I wanted to match him, but the fear kept a strange hold on me, crushing my soul and voice, holding me hostage to this horror. In bed wasn't Mom, but a couple. A college-aged man and woman I'd never seen before, both of them nude and beautiful. Neither of them able to finish their degrees now. Not when the man's throat was slit ear to ear in one jacket line, so much blood coating his smooth brown skin. The lady in no better shape, her corpse covered in deep cuts and punctures from an array of knives, her disembodied blue eyes placed closer to her breasts for a sickening display of humor. "What the fuck?" I struggled to say. The room felt more humid, Danny and I both feeling more fear. But I couldn't turn away. My gaze strayed to the end of the sheets. There was blood soaking all through the fabric, but at the base of the bed was another large bump hidden beneath the blanket. Undoubtedly, another body. The closet door burst open. Danny and I looked straight toward the back, the lamp a dim spotlight for a tall man standing there, breathing heavy, a butcher knife held in his gloved hand. There were black robes over his body, a rubber alien mask over his face. The yellow mask, highlighted by big bug eyes. I couldn't see much more, but this was enough to disturb us. Enough to send us running the other way. We hit the hallway, slipping and stumbling around, our Halloween heads too full of booze and green. Behind us, fast footsteps blared through the dead silence. The man was coming after us. The sisterly concern turned into motherly panic. I wrapped an arm around Danny, pulling him closer. Run! A sliding screech trailed us, the sound of a blade tracing along our walls, its violent wail so unsettling. Shit! I cried. We were halfway home, almost to the kitchen when the overhead lights cut on. Stage fright joined our terror. Immediately, Danny and I froze. Bright lights illuminated the framed photos. None of them were ours. No sign of me, no Danny, no Mom. Instead, they documented an attractive young couple and their beautiful marriage. The Caldwells. Their wedding photos stared back at me, their smiles so beautiful. But where the hell were they now? We went to the wrong house, Danny said. I'd laugh if the scares weren't real, but what could have been a fun drunk story had turned into a nightmare. Once I looked toward the kitchen, another figure greeted me. Frankenstein's monster himself. Or herself. The boobs gave it away. Like the alien, she too wore black robes and held a butcher knife, only hers were dripping fresh red blood. Unable to hide the shivers, I did my best to play it cool, especially in front of my little brother. Who are you? I hurled at the woman. Moving with methodical slowness, she reached up and raised her mask, just enough for a face reveal. Behind me, I heard the man's manic chuckles. I recognized him without even turning around. There stood Mrs. Caldwell in front of us. Her husband, the alien. Both of them stone-cold killers. Straight-up fucking psychos. With Danny trembling, I couldn't show fear. I forced myself to stay poised, staying tall. Maybe I had liquid courage at this point, or something else. An inner fire that buzzed too strong to go away. Looks like y'all broke into the wrong house, Mrs. Caldwell teased behind a green-eyed glare. Indeed, her husband added. Yelling, I pulled Danny and charged forward. The sudden move startled the couple. Mr. Caldwell cried out. Mrs. Caldwell had no chance at swinging that knife as I pushed her out of the way. Get that bitch! She screamed. We ran into the kitchen, the lighting brighter than ever. Fresh oven flames highlighted our horror. Smoke hit us, but not the kind we wanted. God damn it! I coughed. Go! Danny yelled. As we started to go through the sausage fog, a hand reached out and snagged my shoulder. A killer's touch. I got you, you little bitch, Mrs. Caldwell said, her voice muffled behind the mask. She helped me in place. I couldn't move. I couldn't escape. Come on, Candace, Danny cried. I'm trying, I said. Now I heard the husband storm into the kitchen, felt Mrs. Caldwell pull me in closer. A shrill siren rang out. The sound blaring over and over in a nauseous rhythm, a roar stolen from the world's most soulless prison. The noise destroyed my ears, but at least it had the same effect on everyone else. Yelling, Mrs. Caldwell let go and fell back against the counter. I heard the husband's startled scream even over that damn smoke alarm, a state-of-the-art one at that. The gizmo only going unnoticed all along due to Danny and I's super stupor. Let's go, Danny yelled. I grabbed his arm and led the way again, straight out of our neighbor's house. Along the way, I didn't hear the killers closing in on us. The one good thing about that fucking alarm was it drowned everything out. Finally, I threw the front door open and we ran out into the November cold. Danny and I's exit from this suburban, uncanny valley complete, seemingly. Hold it right there, barked a voice by our car. A flashlight froze us, a chubby cop holding it. His police car had us blocked in. Apparently, he'd responded to the alarm. The fire truck was well on its way till the Caldwells arrived, still in costume, but their masks raised. Innocent enough on this holiday. Danny and I jumped back, but there wasn't much else we could do when the cop car was right there, when we were literally held at gunpoint. Wait, it's all a misunderstanding, Mrs. Caldwell smooth-talked the cop. She shrugged, no longer holding that knife. The fire's out now. At her command, the officer raised a walkie-talkie. "No fire truck needed. We're clear." "Listen, they're murderers," I told the officer. I pointed at the house. "There's bodies inside." "Yeah, they killed them," my brother chimed in. The cop's glower fixated on us. "And who are you two exactly?" We hesitated. Danny too scared to speak, and me, well, what was I gonna say? "We live next door," I started. "So what you two been doing, huh?" The cop further prodded. He leaned in closer, all too familiar with what I'm sure we smelled like. "Y'all been smoking a little?" "It's okay, officer," Mrs. Caldwell said. Immediately, the cop turned his attention toward the couple. "Ma'am, did they give y'all any problems?" Mrs. Caldwell gave us a dismissive wave. "They just broke in, that's all." "Broke in?" "It's nothing serious." Her grin stared me down. "None at all," Mr. Caldwell said. They had us. I knew that much. And given their sly smiles, they were happy about it. Relieved to have a cop on their side. Next to me, Danny just took my lead. We knew the drill at this point. "Do y'all want to press any charges, ma'am?" the cop asked Mrs. Caldwell. That cold-blooded serial killer bitch. She looked right at me. "Not at all." She gave me a cryptic wink. One final Halloween scare. I hate flying. Despise it with a burning passion. And why wouldn't I? What's to like about being trapped in a flimsy metal structure that rattles and threatens to fall apart at the seams every time it encounters a sudden gust of wind? A teeny tiny bird could get sucked into its engines, and this hulking monstrosity would immediately crash and explode into a ball of fire. 1 second. One error. One slight miscalculation. That's all it would take for your entire existence to be reduced to a simple statistic. Lost at sea. Flight recorder not found. Search is still on. I do not want my name to be associated with these sentences. No thanks. Gonna call me a pussy for having a perfectly rational fear? Well, that's just fine and dandy with me. Now, this fear isn't the only thing I loathe about flying. It's everything else, too. Cramped seats with no leg space, crying babies, surly toddlers kicking the back of my seat, stale air limp with a stench of sweaty socks and warm liquor, loud conversations of drunk middle-aged assholes. God, I hate it. Fate truly has a cruel, cruel sense of irony that I got saddled with a job that involves so much flying. If the pay wasn't so good, I swear I would have fucked off a long time ago. But even money only goes so far, because no amount of zeros in my paycheck can convince me to get back inside of an airplane after what I saw that night. My experience on that flight struck me with such life-changing terror that I quit my job the second that damn plane landed, and promised to myself that I would never, ever fly again. Ever. It was another one of those cheap red-eye flights that I like to catch after my business trips. I marginally preferred traveling at night, granted that the noise situation wasn't all that better. Loud snores that sounded like the sputtering of dying trucks replaced petulant shrieks of little brats. But at least I didn't have to look out at a sea of swirling clouds floating beneath the plane like a thick white mist, reminding me of just how far away I was from solid ground. I was curled up under a musty blanket, having a fitful sleep full of nightmares of the fuselage being torn apart with my chair and I being sucked out into the air in the blink of an eye. That's when the plane hit a particularly nasty turbulence. The tremors woke me with a jolt, set my heart racing. I dug my fingers into the armrests, pressed my lips together and squeezed my eyes shut, only blinking them open when the rattling had passed. I let out a deep breath as my eyes wandered. Fuck. But the old woman next to me just slept through the whole thing. I felt so envious of her open-mouthed snores. This jealousy would only get magnified when I would later look back on what happened next. I turned my neck, looked out the window. Seated near the middle of the plane, I could clearly see the wing outside. It was lit up by wing scan lights and had a couple of strobe lights flashing beneath it near its tip. Standard stuff. Satisfied that nothing seemed wrong, I began to tear my gaze off the view outside and froze. There was something there. Startled, I leaned forward, pressed my face up against the glass and narrowed my eyes. Cold sweat trickled down the back of my neck when I saw it again. A dark sheet of cloth, tattered, frayed, fluttering from the edge of the wing like it'd gotten caught on something there. What the fuck? How did it get there? How come no one noticed? And how in the world had it managed to stay up there for so long? No sooner had the thought crossed my mind did that rag disappear, slithered off the edge and vanished into the velvety sky. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for the cloth to fly off into the engine, setting it ablaze. But nothing happened. I could feel the tension releasing from my body in waves, making me shiver. Whatever that was, it was gone. Posed no threat to my safety anymore. I decided to wait until next morning to inform the flight attendants about what I just saw and began slumping back into the chair. And then I saw it again out of the corner of my eye. It was closer this time, about halfway down the length of the wing, just fluttering against the roaring wind, right at the edge. I rubbed my eyes, pinched my arm. No, I wasn't dreaming. It really was there. How did it travel halfway up the wing? Shouldn't that be impossible? My head swam as I saw something breaking all laws of physics that had been the cornerstones of my perception and understanding of reality. But of course, that was just the beginning of this horrendous nightmare. For right the next second, something shot out from within the waving folds of the black cloth and latched onto the top side of the wing. It was so bizarre, so fucking impossible that it took me a second to recognize it. It was a human arm. I gasped. Loudly, I think, because I didn't notice it. The only thing I could hear at the time was my muscle-tearing beat of my heart against my sternum. Was that a person there? My question was immediately answered as another arm shot up and landed on the top of the wing. My tongue darted out of my mouth, licked my cracked lips as I wondered how in the ever-loving fuck this person was maintaining their grip on the smooth surface of a plane that was shooting through the air 35,000 feet above the ground. I watched the veins on the two thin arms get stretched to the point of snapping as the entire body got gradually pulled up. A head popped up, small, round, with long dark hair spilling over the face, trying to tear themselves off her scalp and fly off to the side. It was a woman. She had thick, blood-red lips framing a mouth that was opening and closing. Opening and closing. Fast. So damn fast that it was pretty much a blur. Was she speaking? No. The movement was too fast, too rhythmic for that. She pulled her torso up, then her legs, until she was flying flat on the wing. Her mouth never stopped moving, even as her matted locks flew into it and got crushed between her teeth. And her eyes. Dear God, her eyes. Full of rage. Every blood vessel in them had popped. I was terrified and confused. Did she need my help, or was I in danger? The sight was making my brain short-circuit. Then she moved, towards me, like a lizard. A really fucking fast lizard, one whose mouth never stopped its bizarre motion. Within seconds, she was on me. Stood up outside my window, pressed her face up against the glass, hair lashing around wildly. And that's when I heard it, and finally understood what she was doing with her mouth. It was her teeth. They were chattering. I don't know how, but I was able to hear the sound of her teeth gnashing repeatedly, rhythmically. A sob escaped my throat as I shut my eyes and reached overhead for the emergency call button. No way was I going to watch this shit for even a second more. I needed it to end. My finger kept jabbing at the button, not stopping even when the chattering seemed to have ended. "Sir, are you okay?" I jumped. My heart nearly gave out at the sound of that voice. With extreme caution, I opened my eyes and saw a flight attendant leaning over me with a look of concern on her face. "Is everything all right?" she asked again. "Yes," I exclaimed. "There's a woman outside." Outside?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. "Yes," I said. "Right there." I pointed out the window and felt my stomach sink when I realized that no one was there. I leaned against the glass, turned my neck around, but there was absolutely no sign of her. She'd vanished, and it didn't surprise me. "Sir, are you sure you're okay? Are you in need of medical assistance?" I shook my head, forcefully. No, it's fine. Just had a very vivid nightmare. I apologize for disturbing you." She smiled. "It's okay. Please don't hesitate to call if you need help." "Thank you." As she walked away, I rested my head on the seat and sighed. What had I just seen? Was it a nightmare? A hallucination? Must have been. There was no other rational explanation. Couldn't be. I glanced at the old woman seated next to me. She was still snoring. Slept right through everything. Yeah, a nightmare, I mused, and turned off the light overhead, plunging the cabin into darkness once again. Little did I know that the worst was yet to come. I was snuggled under the sweat-soaked blanket, and my nerves had just begun to settle when I heard it again. It started off low, distant, like it was coming from the top of a cliff far away. But it got louder. The chattering of teeth, like the noise of an angry rattlesnake makes, but much more metallic and predatory. I sat up straight, tense shoulders, eyes wide. I listened closely, trying to trace the source of that sound. It sounded like she was inside the cabin. I tried to swallow whatever spit was left in my mouth, but the lump in my throat refused to allow that to happen. No, it was the same last time. It sounded like she was in the cabin then too, but she'd been outside. I whipped my neck around, scanned the cabin as much as my eyes and my position would allow. There was no sign of her. But of course there wasn't. She'd been lying down on the wing when she first started moving towards me. Just then, almost as if she could hear what I was thinking, I felt a hand on my leg. My mouth dropped open. I tried to scream, but I was so scared. No sound came out. A pale white hand was gripping my shin, tightly twisting my leg muscles and making my very bones ache. Then another hand on the other leg this time. The vice-like grip on my legs tightened, forcing them apart. That's when I saw her. Sliding out from underneath the seat in front of me, she began climbing up on me. Her teeth continued to chatter maddeningly. Finally finding my strength, I let out a scream so piercing it woke everyone in the cabin. And that woman slithered off, somehow disappearing under the very same seat she had crawled out of, like water swirling down an unclogged drain. Lights began to get switched off one by one, and slowly scared whispers and grumbling filled the cabin. I stayed awake the rest of the flight. I had to apologize profusely to the flight attendants and my fellow passengers. I told them I wasn't well, that the stress was getting to me, but I wouldn't be troubling them anymore. Someone a couple of rows back even offered me a pill for my anxiety. I declined and sat on an empty seat near the flight attendants, scared out of my wits, but not letting it show. By this time, I'd already made my decision to never get on a plane ever again. But something else happened. One last chapter of this nightmare that cemented my decision. Morning had come. The flight had landed. The passengers were getting off one by one. I was last. I wanted to take my time, apologize to, and thank the flight attendants for all their help. The one I spoke to was the same one who had come to my help the previous night. She smiled as I stammered through my groveling apology and told me it was okay, that I need to take better care of myself. I smiled and began walking off. Chills racked my spine. A sound. That sound. I turned around and saw the flight attendant staring at me with wide, dead eyes. Her mouth was moving.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault that violence follows you around like an ever-present shadow, that hatred festers like black seeds in your heart, sprouting in lightning bursts of black eyes and ruptured spleens and shattered bones. It's not your fault that I crawled under my bed in mind-numbing fear, tiny body convulsing in dread-filled sobs, the music so loud, deafening, sounds of fist against nose and bone-curdling shrieks of fear. I understand that, Father. It's not your fault. When Mom crawled under the bed to protect me, to comfort me, it wasn't your fault that you dragged her out. The barrage of heavy blows to her fragile skull still so vivid in my mind. Bone against bone, blood mixed with blood, a childhood fading so rapidly, replaced then by an empty void. And when the violence expanded, when my bones and my body could suffer the unjust penance, weeks and months in and out of hospitals, always those damn slippery stairs, always a bully at school to blame, always a car accident, always a door that suddenly closed in my face. Was it your fault then? No, it's not your fault, Father. I see that now. The fathomless depths of my scars, the knowledge that Mom died drowning in her own blood, all the fear and torment and inhumanity, and still, it's not your fault. When did the demon creep into your soul? When did it take hold? That black worm of the abyss, that slithering tongue in your ear, in your mind, in your muscles, in everything you are. Pure, unfiltered evil, corrupting every single aspect of my dear Father. How long have you been possessed? Worry not, Father. We shall rid you of this foulness. We shall cleanse you, purify your soul. Please, just stop, Cora. I can't take it anymore. I'm not possessed. I'm begging you. I'm not possessed. Shush now. Of course you are. Why else would you hurt the things you love? Why else would you destroy everything you hold dear? That holds you dear. It's the only explanation, Father. Please, just stop. Now hold still. This part is very important. Move a muscle, and this would have all been for nothing. No, The devil festers deep in your mind, you see, all the way inside. It's safest to go through the eye. I am sorry for the crudeness of my tools, but they will do the job. A drill is a drill after all. Cora, you fucking whore. That's him talking, not you. I know that now. Just remember, I'm doing this for you, Father. Know that deep down. It's not your fault. Did I ever tell you the story about the zipper girl, Donna Martinez? Oh, it's such a good one, too. Donna had eyes like a mandolin, complex and dry. She smiled like a monsoon, whatever that means, and her hair had the wavelength of filthy light. She was special, is what I'm getting at. So when she disappeared, the whole town was in an uproar. I remember the night we found Zipper Girl vividly. Cold air, warm beer, tepid cigarettes, chilling in Dan the dog's car. It was Dan the dog's dog Danny, the guy in the back seat that we sort of knew but never remembered the name of, and me. The moon shone bright like an overheated Ouija board, and we were all wasted on some pills the guy in the back seat offered us when Dan the dog pulled into the parking lot by Fletcher's Peak. Hey, what's that? I said. What? Dan the dog asked. I don't see nothing. It was definitely something. A girl. I could see her up by the peak, all wavelengthy hair and monsoon smile, except she wasn't smiling. And she didn't have hair anymore. Her eyes were no longer like a mandolin either, more like a stained old clavicylinder. That's fucking Donna, I explained. No fucking way, Dan the dog said. Way fucking way, Dan the dog's dog Danny said, although I may have hallucinated this particular part. The guy in the back seat nodded furiously. That's her all right, he said. I remember her nose. It's like watching a movie in reverse. You don't understand shit and it feels deeply unsettling, but you can't stop looking at it. We all nodded at this astute observation. While we were busy discussing her reality-defying facial features, she had slowly sauntered toward us, and all of a sudden her reversed movie nose was squished up against the window like an inquisitive Eiffel Tower. Please unzip me, she mumbled. I opened the door and it suddenly struck me. She was naked. All natural. Her bald head reflected the Ouija board light from the moon with some intensity, and somehow that made me more uncomfortable than anything else. Unzip me. Look, I can make excuses all day for what I did next. I was high, wasted, Brahmsen-list. I should have questioned it, but I didn't. Without hesitation, I grabbed the zipper up by her throat, and in a single motion, I pulled it down to her navel. It's the sound that still haunts me. Can you imagine? Organs and blood slumping out of her like sludgy meat river, one on top of the other. For a moment, the mandolin returned to her face and she whispered, "Thank you," before collapsing in the pulpy remnants of her own innards. No one ever figured out who made the Zipper Girl, but man, I'm never accepting pills from the guy in the back seat that we sort of know but can't quite remember the name of ever again. I'm looking for someone to take care of my beautiful baby boy. He's well behaved, probably around 7, dirty blonde hair, one tongue, 2 eyes, a head, and a neck. I suspect he was born with legs and arms, but I can't be sure of this, as he might have grown them later. He goes by the name of the End of the World, but you can just call him Isaac. You can feed him, but he does not require sustenance most days. He'll eat the scabs off your wounds, or the loose skin hanging from the edges of your fingernails, or any old part of your body, dead or not, should the need arise. He bathes himself regularly in various liquids and generally doesn't smell. That is to say, you'll get used to it over time. By that I mean you'll learn not to use your nose around him. Cellular memory, I believe they call it. He does not talk back, or indeed talk at all. He might attempt to signal you with his eyes though, so you'll learn quickly to recognize the sound of them dangling against each other. Please do not let him wait. He will not hesitate to crawl into your mind. He is such a sweetheart though. He will sit for hours just staring at you, eyes touching eyes. Should he suddenly slither away, please let him. Do not attempt to follow or restrain him. Should he bring home friends, I'd suggest leaving the house for a bit. The sounds can get pretty intense. He'll clean up after himself, but I wouldn't be around for that part either. You'll slowly waste away, but that's okay. It's natural. You don't need your organs on the inside. That's medical propaganda. Lies. They work just fine on the outside too. Black boils shaped like screaming faces on your skin? Perfectly manageable. Quite becoming even? Spongy placenta mushrooms sprouting in and around your genitals? Delicious. Tastes just like murder. And that is a gift. An honor. Remember that. Isaac needs you. He needs you now. And the world needs Isaac. If you're reading this, you know. Deep down, you know. You know that the world is a hate-filled, black, bulging cyst of corpse vomit ready to burst. He will make sure it happens. He needs someone to help him grow, is all. It's a small price to pay, wouldn't you agree? Your body, your sanity, your life, your soul. He sees you now. He feels you. The moment you internally processed his name, he became aware of you. He wants you. Do not be afraid when he comes. When he one day slides into your bed, let his tongue caress your eyes. Let his eyes caress your tongue. His oozing pus flesh will feel strange against your skin at first, but with time you will not only accept it, you will come to cherish it, to love it. Please take care of him until you no longer can. Thank you.
Allie didn't like Tamara. I don't know why. I mean, it's not like Tamara ever bothered her, or anyone. Tamara was the classic quiet loner kid, complete with black fishnets, fingerless gloves, and choppy bright blue and black hair. She was the only alternative kid at school, so she wasn't exactly swimming in friends. She was really good at makeup, though. It was her passion. Rumor had it that her mom bought her all kinds of super classy high-end makeup to use. She'd come to school with a face like out of a fashion magazine, and she always had these long, false eyelashes. Other girls in school tried to wear them too, but they could never get them to stick, and the edges would be coming off their eyelid. Or they'd try to put their eyeliner on over them and totally mess it up. Not Tamara, though. Hers looked flawless, like they were natural eyelashes, except, of course, they were freakishly long. I think maybe Allie didn't like her because she was so good at makeup. Allie strove to be the pretty, preppy blonde, like that whole high school stereotype was her jam. It's all she wanted. It was important to her the way nothing else was, and she did a pretty good job being that girl, except her makeup was just bad. She couldn't seem to figure it out. Her eyeliner was always crooked. Her foundation was always the wrong shade. The other popular girls would snipe at her about it. Looking back, I think she was so insecure about it that it just infuriated her that Tamara, who didn't even care about being popular or liked, was good at it, and not her. I don't know, it's all speculation at this point, but it's been years since it happened, and it's not like I've talked about it with either of them since.
The day it happened, Allie was ragging on Tamara. Again, she did that a lot. Went out of her way to call Tamara weird or a freak or ugly. I didn't like it, to be honest, and I should have told her to knock it off. But Allie was my best friend, and I didn't want to upset her, or I was a coward. I was a million things, but a good person. Then again, that's kind of what high school is, isn't it? Bunch of sneering little assholes who haven't learned human decency yet. So, Allie was making fun of Tamara like always, and just before the bell rang for the first period, she sneered. Those falsies are so trashy. You look like you stuck spider legs on your eyes, but I bet you'd like that, don't you, you freak? Tamara didn't say anything. She never said anything. But she did watch as Allie and I marched off to first period. She watched in a way that made me uneasy. There wasn't anything unusual about school that day. There wasn't anything unusual about that school day. It was a Friday, and Allie and I had planned a sleepover like we often did. We met up after school, and by that time, I'd just forgotten Allie's snipe at Tamara that morning. It was easy to forget since it happened so often. It was just a normal part of our day at that point. About halfway on our walk to Allie's house, I felt the hairs prickling on the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I stopped in the middle of our conversation. Allie was talking about one of the books we were reading for English class, Pride and Prejudice, I think, and turned around, half expecting to see nobody there. But there was someone. Tamara. Allie turned to look at what I'd seen, and immediately her face twisted in annoyance. Ugh, is she seriously following us? Maybe she's just walking home too, I said. As if. She never walks this way. I would have noticed. Something else struck me as strange about this situation. Tamara had stopped walking the moment we had. She was just standing there then, watching us. Let's just keep walking, I said. And that might have been the end of it, except that Allie could never let anything go. Especially not when it came to Tamara. Hey, bitch, she shouted. What the fuck are you looking at? Tamara didn't say anything. What, you decided to follow us home? Think if you beg us, maybe we'll be friends with you? You're so pathetic. Tamara still didn't say anything, but she started walking toward us. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. Oh my God, she's actually coming over here, laughed Allie. But there was an edge to her voice. We should go, I said, with the kind of clarity that comes right before catastrophe, when you can see the train coming and you know you need to get off the tracks. No way, I want to see what she does. Tamara stopped a few feet from us. Why me? She asked calmly. It suddenly occurred to me that I'd never actually spoken to her, and she'd never spoken to me. To either of us. Why you? Allie laughed. Why? Do you think you're special or something? I am special, she said quietly. Oh, brother, did your mommy tell you that? Are you gonna go home and tell her that the big girls are being mean to you? Allie affected a crybaby pout, which I only noticed out of my peripheral vision. I couldn't stop looking at Tamara. I couldn't stop my instincts that were screaming that I needed to get away from her. You're not answering my question. Why me? Suddenly, Allie's playful demeanor dropped and I could practically feel her rage. Who the fuck are you to demand anything from me? Who do you think you are? Not who, said Tamara. What? What? Repeated Allie. That's when Tamara's eyes started to move. At first, I thought she was just rolling them weirdly to freak us out or something. But then they started bulging out of her eye sockets, or sort of wiggling around, like they were trying to wriggle out. And then they did. wriggle out, that is. 2 pairs of eyes plopped right out onto the pavement. Except they weren't eyes. They had legs, like tons of spider legs, so they could scurry around on the ground. They looked a lot like the false eyelashes Tamara wore every day. At the back of each eyeball was a tail. They looked like scorpion tails, only they appeared to be made of bone, white bone covered in red gunk. We stared down at the eyeballs. Then I looked back up at Tamara. Her eye sockets were empty and bleeding, red rivulets running down her pale skin. She was opening her mouth slowly, and I saw something wriggling inside, something that had a lot of legs. Allie screamed in pain and clutched my arm until it bruised. I looked down and saw one of the eyeballs was on her shoe, and its bony tail had stabbed her in the ankle. I swore and kicked it off, sending it flying towards some bushes. The other eyeball was scurrying toward me. I yanked Allie around and let her hold on to me while we fled. We ran all the way home, Allie sobbing, "What the fuck? What the fuck?" next to me. When we got in her front door, Allie practically collapsed, screaming about her leg. I looked and saw that the cut from the eyeball thing had really gone deep. Her pant leg was soaked in blood, and she just couldn't stop screaming. Her mom was home and saw what had happened. She rushed us both to the hospital, begging me to try to keep Allie calm in the back seat. It was the longest car ride of my life, despite the fact that the hospital was only 5 minutes away. Allie ended up needing stitches. The doctor said that whatever she tripped on, that was the story she gave in a moment of panic after they asked, that she tripped and hit something on the way down. It had sliced her ankle clean to the bone. There was talk of nerve damage. I didn't know that was even possible. She stayed pretty quiet for days after that. I stayed by her side, waiting for her to snap out of it, but she didn't. Not really. A few days later, she went to the hospital due to a fever and redness around the cut. Turns out it had gotten infected, which required a pretty intense hospital stay and a lot of antibiotics. I stayed with her as often as I could. My parents even let me miss school for a couple of days so I could stay by her side. By the time she was out of the hospital for good, Allie was a different person. She was quiet and jumpy. She was always looking over her shoulder. She wasn't as confident. Or at least she didn't act as confident as she once did. I tried talking to her about what happened, but she completely shut me down. She wanted to pretend it never happened. She never bothered Tamara again, never so much as looked at her. Tamara didn't bother us either. She remained quiet and alone, like she always was. It's been years since then. I'm still friends with Allie. She's recovered, I guess, from what happened, but she's not the same person. I've never heard her say a bad thing about or to anyone else, so I guess the change isn't all bad. But I know she still has nightmares, and sometimes I still have to talk her down from panic attacks. As for Tamara, she went on to become a big makeup artist on YouTube. No, I won't tell you which one. I watch her videos every once in a while. Sometimes I'll see one of her eyes move just so, and I would wonder if anyone else ever noticed that they don't seem to want to stay in her head.